Now, what is sacred? I'm glad you asked. If you think about what is sacred to you or what are sacred to other people, what are things that you know are sacred, you'll discover that very quickly that there's no thing that's inherently sacred. In fact, there's not even a type of thing that's inherently sacred. People believe in objects that are sacred. People believe in days that are sacred. Some people will say that the body is sacred. Some people will say that a certain place might be sacred. A thought might be sacred, an idea, of course. And so there's no thing that's inherently sacred. Well then, what is sacred? That's a tough thing to define for ourselves, and so Durkheim hops in for a little more help, and he says, the sacred is above all that which the profane must not and cannot touch with impunity. The sacred is above all that which the profane must not and cannot touch with impunity. In other words, no thing is inherently sacred, but the way you know that you're focusing or that you're seeing what's sacred for a particular religion is because it has specific rules and regulations, rules and prohibitions against coming in contact with the profane. And so what is the profane? Well, the profane is that thing that the sacred is being protected from. So these are a little bit ephemeral, and they're ephemeral because in every religion, what counts as sacred and what counts as profane might be really quite radically different, and is quite radically different. But systematically, you'll see that in religious practices, there's a thing that's being really protected and the thing that it's being protected from. So you can probably think of examples from your own lives. So in religions where you must not eat certain foods, in Islam, for example, where you must not eat pork, you might extrapolate from that what's the sacred is the body, and the profane might be pork. And so there are all these rules and regulations, rules and prohibitions that protect the body from pork, right? From this particular animal that's considered the profane, the thing that the sacred must not or cannot touch with impunity. In other words, it must not or cannot touch without consequence. So the idea is not that these are things that cannot that they don't have the possibility of coming in contact with one another. There are always things that could. There's always that danger, that potential, that the sacred and the profane could come in contact with one another. So for example, you wouldn't see a rule of the sacred, for example, being the North American continent, and the profane would be Africa, a far-off continent, because there's really no potentiality for those coming in contact with one another unless we wait, millions of years, and then maybe they will. But you'll see rules about the sacred or the profane, about things that could always potentially come in contact with one another, like, for example, the body and the pig, the body and pork, which have the possibility. It's not outside the realm of imagination, and so therefore the rules are there. And what happens when they do, on those occasions where the rules are broken and they do come in contact with one another, the belief system, it says, so they cannot touch each other with impunity, without consequence. Each one of those is dramatically and eternally changed as a result. So the sacred, when it comes in contact with the profane, is dramatically and permanently changed because of that contact, just like the profane is also eternally changed by contact with the sacred. So Durkheim says, sacred things are things that are protected and isolated by prohibitions, and profane things are those things to which the prohibitions are applied and that must be kept at a distance from the sacred. In other words, as frustrating as this definition might be, and I know that the vagueness of it can be a little hard to grasp onto, but it's also broad enough that it allows different types of religion to comfortably fall into this definition. In other words, sacred and profane are not any definite and specific things. The sacred are the things that are protected, that are isolated, that are kept away from the profane. The profane are those things that the sacred is being kept away from. So they're really defined in relation to one another.